So welcome everyone. I'm Carolyn Waters, Director and Head Librarian here at the New York Society Library. We are thrilled to have so many people here tonight, joining both in person and on the live stream. And this is the 27th annual New York City Book Awards celebration. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Many of you probably have just heard about the New York Society Library recently, and probably are wondering, like, what is this place? You would not be alone. We hear this every day. So let me tell you, lest you form any misperceptions about us. We are the oldest library and cultural institution in New York City, founded in 1754, a century before the advent of the public library system. And in the 18th century, the word society simply referred to an organization or a group of people formed for a particular purpose or activity. So in fact, we are bibliophiles. We're open to all, and we'd love for you to join us, either as a member or as a guest. And I think that you will agree that the fact that we are the oldest library in the city, we're uniquely qualified to recognize and honor the best books of literary quality or historical significance that evoke the spirit or enhance appreciation of New York City. And therefore, I want to congratulate all of the winners of this year's New York City Book Awards. Yes, please. I really don't know how our jury does it. I've been frantically reading your books now for the past couple of weeks since the awards were announced, and I've almost finished them all. Almost. I'm not telling which ones I haven't finished yet. But I congratulate you all on your scholarship, your inventiveness, your storytelling, and most of all, your literary skill in bringing our great city to light. To this year's New York City Book Award jury, also sitting here, half of you guys, my deep appreciation and admiration for your extraordinary efforts, reading and deliberating over hundreds of books to select these 5 winners. Special thanks especially to Bianca Calabresi, who I wish were here right now, but she's on her way, desperately trying to get here in a cab, for devoting the last 7 years as a juror and the last 3 as chair of the jury, and who is stepping down this year. We are definitely going to miss her. Thank you to Katie Freakus. I'm not sure where Katie is. Raise your hand, Katie. Our staff liaison to the jury, to Sarah Holliday, sitting here, and Maria Lusamanda, who's out selling books outside, our events team for orchestrating the awards ceremony, and to Jenny Lawrence, who unfortunately she's on the live stream tonight. We wish you, Jenny, you were here, for making the Hornblower Award possible for the best New York City related book by a first-time author. I now have the pleasure of introducing Ellen Eisman. Ellen is a longtime trustee of the New York Society Library who has also served as chair of the board. We are extraordinarily grateful to her for her very generous support over the years for the New York City Book Awards. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you, Carolyn, for that lovely introduction, and good evening. As said, I'm Ellen Eisman, longtime trustee and supporter of the New York City Book Awards, which have made increasingly such a mark on this wonderful city and reflect the talents of the winners and so effectively. I'm delighted to introduce the event tonight and to congratulate the award winners and to echo Carolyn's profound gratitude to Bianca Calabresi for her dedication to service and service for so long, leading the jury, and all the jurors too. You've brought us tonight to this wonderful celebration of individual books and to the world of books and reading in general. Thank you all so much for coming.
All right, apologies, it's me again. Bianca is still making her way here. I am going to try to read her remarks, so bear with me. It's very small on this very small screen. I'm going to do my best. Okay, let's see here. Let me find page 1. Since at least the 19th century, Western readers have tended to think of reading primarily as a solitary act. This is not the case for the New York City Book Awards. For one, choosing the winners typically involves a group of 7 or 8 volunteer members of the library reading 150 or more books published in the last calendar year, books loosely understood to be about New York City. I say loosely because sometimes one finds that a book with New York in the title doesn't have much to say about New York after all. From September to March, we read on our own, yes, but also discuss and disagree and celebrate and persuade until at the final meeting, the select few that have won most of our hearts are chosen. But of course, there are many more people involved in making these awards possible, who I'd like to thank as well. The award underwriters, Ellen Eisman and Jenny Lawrence, library staff, Carolyn, Sarah and Marie-Louise Amanda, and especially the many members of the circulation desk who go to the ends of the library, if not the earth, to find what we need to read. And Katie Freakus, who has never visibly or audibly lost her temper with me, or anyone to my knowledge in my 7 years of working with her. Katie, it has been so much fun to do this with you, and I'm so very grateful for your continued help, prudence, and patience. Thanks also to former jury chairs, Lucienne Block and Warren Wexler, who are here tonight, who brought me on the committee where I've been able to unite my 2 favorite states of being, reading books and living in New York City, into one. And above all, my particular gratitude and admiration for this year's jurors. And please stand if you're with us, for those who are. Jesse Alvarez, who is not with us, but will be here soon. Debbie Applegate. Nikhila Yenger. Anita Kapadia. Disha Filya. Be on our screen shortly. Tracy Kwan. And Jonathan Soffer. Thank you all. A slightly frustrated juror once asked me what my criteria were for identifying potential award winners. It's taken me a while to formulate, but I think it's simply that when you put the book down, when you go out to the street, the book makes you see New York City differently. You may encounter ghosts from Tales of Forgotten Inhabitants. You may recognize new neighbors. You may re-see a quintessential New York institution, be it grim or glorious, Rikers or hip hop, from someone who's been inside. Sometimes it's the genre that proves the vehicle for a new point of view. A fictional account of a radical movement and its members that adds to and expands on award-winning archival histories. Different years produce different winning combinations. This year's encouraging fact: 4 of the 5 awards went to first books, including but not exclusive to the Hornblower winner. This year is all about new writers, new voices, new views of the past and present, and for the future. So a special thanks to these brave, bold authors and their singular visions of New York. And of course, different juries produce different lists, because reading collectively makes us see books and books about New York differently than when we read alone. Thanks then to this library, one of the handful of places that offer us the chance not only to read, but to read together. If we all keep doing this, writing boldly, reading collectively, we stand a chance of seeing differently, better, and together. Thank you all.
From the very premise of Sadiq Fofana's extraordinary debut, Stories from the Tenants Downstairs, a collection of stories about the dreams and despair of the Black tenants of Banneker Terrace in Harlem, who are at risk of losing their homes due to gentrification and the attendant rent hikes and accelerated evictions. From this very premise, I was hooked. But I was not prepared to fall in love the way I did with Sadiq's lean but unsparing prose, his masterful storytelling, and his unforgettable characters. Other readers, critics, my fellow jurors, and I have praised Sadiq's brilliant feats of language and this tender collection's power to break your heart. We laughed and trembled as we lost ourselves in these pages. We've been challenged by Sadiq's timely, astute, and loving commentary on community and change. But what seems to strike us most universally about this collection are the characters' voices. Often, we writers are championed for giving voice to the voiceless through our work. But Sadiq wisely reminds us that real people like Miss Dallas and Mr. Murray, Mimi and Najee, Candice and Darius aren't voiceless. They aren't silent. The truth is, they are unheard. And Sadiq's stories demand that we hear, that we listen, that we pay attention, that we consider uncomfortable complexities, that we consider our complicity, that we upend our assumptions. The intro to Sadiq's collection is written in verse. The last 4 lines read, "You see my hurt grin, you see my makeup, you see the stub from my job. You see the rainbow pop up in my scars. Everybody got a story, everybody got a tale. Question is it despair or prevail?" Last year, in an interview with LitHub, when asked about balancing despairing and prevailing in his stories, Sadiq said this: "Most of the characters think they have prevailed, and their story ends on a note of hope. But there are also a few stories where we as readers inject our sense of despair. A character feeling a sense of hope when we as readers look at their reality and sense despair says as much, if not more, I think, about society and the complexity of the American dream as it does about the character." With this collection, Sadiq has shown us what the best fiction can do: offer more questions than answers and move us beyond ourselves. The New York Society Library's Hornblower Award is given to an excellent New York City related book by a first-time author. Sadiq, on behalf of my fellow jurors, it is my honor and my pleasure to present this year's Hornblower Award to you for Stories from the Tenants Downstairs.
Beautiful. Wow. What beautiful words from Disha. Disha, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, those words were beautiful. You know, spoiler alert, it all goes downhill from here with the speech. But thank you for this tremendous honor. Just a few words. I arrived in New York City for my first day of college on August 29th, 2001. Classes didn't start for another 2 weeks into September. My first class in college was gym, soccer. When I got there, nobody was playing. Everybody was on the bleachers looking sad. The gym teacher came in finally and said, "You all can go home." I was looking forward to playing soccer, but it was the 11th. And I found out soon thereafter on the news in my dorm room why everybody was sad. This was my first introduction to the city. The first time I was in Harlem was also my freshman year of college. They had a party for us freshmen at the Central Park Zoo. A bunch of us took the train down there, and it was magnificent, a great orientation bash. But on our way back, we made the classic NYC newcomer mistake of trying to get to 116th and Broadway and ending up in 116th and Malcolm X. We were scared because of what we had heard about the area. The first time I walked down 125th by myself during the day was also scary in a different way. The shops, the hawkers of wear, the booming bass of boom boxes, the jostling for position on the sidewalk, the yelling to greet friends across the street, the smells of food both fast and ethnic. The noise was almost too much for me. I felt out of place. I was waiting for everybody to point at me all at once and say, "You're not from here." It didn't take long through teaching at the Choir Academy of Harlem and Union Settlement on the east side, living on 139th and Riverside to feel like home. Many of the people were just like the people I knew from my hometown, Boston. Through my fiction, I wanted to capture that experience, the one of the urban denizen, in the form of the tenant board lady handing out pamphlets, the old pops trying to put you on, the stoop chillers, the resourceful girl working 60 hours a week, the bus takers. I heard so many people in my neighborhoods in Harlem, Crown Heights, and the Bronx tell totally enthralling tales that shattered all that I thought about who owned fiction, that I wanted to render their styles on the page in the form of these stories. It's been a decade and a half endeavor, soft and hard passes, drafts upon drafts upon drafts, promises kept and promises deferred. But through it all, there were key people who really held me down. I'd like to thank my wife, Lindsay Strawn, who's just as brilliant and gorgeous as the day I met her. Shout out to my upbeat son, Tay. Shout out to my hardworking mom, brother, and sister. I'd like to thank the Brooklyn School for Math and Research, where I'm a public school teacher, the glorious students, staff, and administration there. A gazillion thanks to Lori Moore, who took me under her wing, to Adam Ross at the Sewanee Review, who took a chance on publishing the first story in this collection, to my dashing agent, Ethan Bassoff, to my elegant editor, Kathy Belden, whose career in this game is nothing short of legendary, to the wonderkind of a publicist, Clara Mora, who's always 9 steps ahead, to Rebecca Jett, Mark Galarita, to Disha, Phil Yaw, and the jurors who've gone above and beyond to support this book. Reflecting on this year, publishing could be a mind warp. Often you feel like you're making your mark while simultaneously the mark is fading. It's like blowing hot breath on a cold window pane. And when you got folks propping you up on the professional level, on the human level, it restores your faith in everything. So thank you all for lifting me up for this moment. Thank you to the New York Society. I'm so honored, floating nice and irie at this way that you've chosen to honor this amazing infinite city, the people who live in it, the writers who write about it. Thank you for this great award to cherish always. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm very pleased to present to Jared Shanahan, who unfortunately can't be here today, an award for his extraordinary book, Captives: How Rikers Island Took New York City Hostage. This is a rare instance, which I know as a history professor, of a dissertation being turned into a book, and being turned into a book which holds the reader's attention riveted, which really truly breaks new ground. Captives does what a great history monograph should do. It uses new sources that nobody else has really paid attention to or looked at before to take an issue that was treated at the margins of history and bring it to the center. And to do this in a revised PhD dissertation is a huge achievement. A lot of the story that Shanahan tells is a story of people who are trying to reform the jails and how they failed and why they failed. And in particular, a progressive reformer named Anna Cross, who was one of the primary developers of Rikers Island. Anna Cross was the Reform Corrections Commissioner under Mayor Robert F. Wagner Jr. And I first heard about Anna Cross in my own work when I was doing oral histories for my biography of Ed Koch. And Alan Schwartz, who was a federal judge and who was Ed Koch's law partner and corporation counsel of the city of New York in the Koch administration, told me that he had in law school had an internship with Anna Cross, which had given him a lifelong interest in corrections issues and was one of the reasons that the city signed a consent decree about the jails when he was corporation counsel. And although I did mention this and I talked about the consent decree, there were so many issues. And in terms of crime and race, my choice was sort of the natural choice that an historian would make at the time, to talk mostly about the police and police violence and police abuse. And incarceration was just a sort of secondary thing that was off. Captives really brings this issue that is so important that when I was writing this history, put off to the side, because you can, history's all about selection. You can only do so much, right? And it answers many previously unraised questions about the past. In addition, Shanahan brings the unique perspective of someone who was actually incarcerated at Rikers Island for 45 days after an arrest at a protest. His experience clearly informs the book and gives it passion and power, but it doesn't detract from his careful scholarship. And that's another reason that this is a great and powerful book to read. It answers many previously unraised questions, and its radical anti-racist politics go beyond more conventional Marxist and liberal accounts and provoke much larger questions about the nature of human freedom. Like Simon Balto's recent book on the Chicago Police Department, Shanahan challenges the notion of reform itself. Reform fails, he says. Liberal reform of jails has failed because it doesn't deal with the economically structural problem of rebellion against totalitarianization. Shouldn't have had that line. And it also delivers a critique of the socialism in one city, New Deal for New York of LaGuardia and Wagner, and of municipal unionism, with its indictment of the Correction Workers Union and its attempts to keep incarceration punitive. Finally, like Balto's book, he shows how reforms just don't stick because they're expensive, and there's no sustained funding for them, and the funding starts out, everything looks good, and then it disappears. In raising these questions, it also provokes some huge additional questions. Should prisons be abolished? Who's going to be the new Beccaria? And who figures out how we can maintain social cohesion, improve the administration of justice, inaugurate a system of restorative justice while we abolish or minimize incarceration? And what does a real system that's based on restorative justice and rather than revenge mean? These are very deep, very profound, and I was blown away with this book because it left me with more questions than answers.
Good evening. I am not Jared Shanahan. I am not Ben Mabie, who was going to receive the award for him. I am head of events Sarah Holliday, but Mr. Mabie has given me his remarks. So he is associated with the publication of the book, so that these are in his voice. Jared and I and all my former colleagues at Verso Books are tremendously honored for captives to be considered in such great company here tonight. I regret that I am unable to make it due to a family emergency. Jared and I first met in activist circles in 2016, just as I arrived in New York and shortly before his incarceration on Rikers Island. We shared stories of arrests and my much shorter stint in jail. I listened as he observed the terrible white blind spot of working-class New York history that even those books and scholars most dedicated to chronicling the life and struggle of everyday New Yorkers so often left those warehoused in the city's jails out of the frame. Across some dozen books, he reviewed these cages and the people who spent their lives inside them, and found that they had earned very few pages in aggregate. With Captives, Jared has done more than correct the record. He has put Rikers Island back at the center of our city's story. In his telling, the island is a veritable nerve center for the many transformations in New York's last century or so. It picks up on deeper architectonic murmurs, the transformation in municipal government, a tough-on-crime turn, white flight, and the new geography of race and freedom in American life. But in his hands, Rikers Island isn't just shaped by history. The people who populate it are also driving it. The freedom struggles and jailhouse travel far, and the bloody and bruising metronome of struggles between prisoners and COs, between protesters and cops, between city bureaucrats and the corrections officers union, shape history with an immediacy that deserves wide recognition. Jared's book has consequences for how we think about the era of mass incarceration, how it is driven not only by national electoral politics, a conservative turn from prosecutors, or local concerns about safety, but also the grassroots of the carceral state. He also recasts the history of neoliberalism and specifically underlines the role of rank-and-file cop and correction officer agitation in producing a formula for municipal rule that cuts nearly every part of the city budget at the same time it rewards law and order. Anyone watching budget deliberations and union negotiations at City Hall today will recognize that Jared sketches out an era we're still trapped in. Maybe most importantly, Jared provides us with tools to think about the future of Rikers and jails in New York City. After Jordan Neely's lynching on a subway car last week, it is hard to shake the feeling that we are in a new revanchist moment in New York. It will take grassroots organizations and critical intellectuals like those who have earned awards tonight to push for a different vision of our city and our obligations to one another. But Jared's book reminds us that places like Rikers Island, hell on earth, a place that ended the lives of dozens of inmates in the last year alone, who federal monitors have just reported is characterized by excessive force from officers, was not built by bloodthirsty reactionaries or those calling for a harsh and punishing justice. It was built by well-intentioned reformers. With pastel walls and rehabilitative initiatives, Rikers was supposed to be the jail to end all jails. At each step of its expansion, its promise to integrate social services into the jail was how a broad majority in the New York government justified its runaway growth. Over the next few years, we will close Rikers, although many in the city, including our mayor and many on city council, would like to replace it with jails in each and every borough. They say that these new facilities will be restorative rather than destructive. This is where Jared concludes his book. This time, they say, it'll be different. And we will make sure that the winner gets these materials.
I'm going to give Jesse Alvarez's remarks. First, congratulations and thank you, Dr. Shante Paradigm Smalls, for the tremendous work you put into the writing of Hip Hop Heresies, Queer Aesthetics in New York City. Through an insightful and critical lens, Dr. Small's research explores how queer aesthetics and hip hop became intrinsically linked in the early New York City cultural scene of the 70s and 80s. Excavating everyday collisions between race, gender, sexualities, traditions, and languages, the reader experiences the discoveries and experimental collaborations born during those tumultuous times while learning about the innovative cultural signifiers, sensory features, and performance styles that were nurtured and encouraged. I'm old enough to remember when hip-hop was a fad, party music, nothing too serious or heavy. Hip-hop culture has been around now for over 50 years. It's hard to believe. It's traveled across the country and around the world. It's not only present in visual and performative arts, but it's also provided a vocabulary, a style, a vision, and a philosophy for youth cultures worldwide. Dr. Small's work presents New York City as the nexus of hip-hop culture, a metropolis where it was possible for the do-it-yourself downtown artists to collide and form a unique bond with MCs, b-boys, DJs, bombers, and other hip-hop pioneers from the Bronx, Uptown, Queens, and Brooklyn. It is with great admiration that I present this award to Shantae Paradigm Smalls for their book, Hip Hop Heresies, Queer Aesthetics in New York City.
Wow. Thank you so much, everyone, for all of you for being here. I'm going to grab my notes here. So who would have thought a queer and genderqueer Black kid who grew up between Connecticut and New York City would write a book about one of their first loves, hip hop. Also, I feel like hip hop raised me. It's turning 50 in August this year. And I'm so excited to accept this award. I want to thank the New York Society Library and the jurors for awarding me one of the 2022-2023 New York City Book Awards. Thank you to my press, NYU Press, the editor-in-chief, Eric Zinger, who waited many years for this book, the entire marketing team there at NYU, and the series editors of the series I'm on at NYU Press, Post-Millennial Pop, Doctors Karen Thompson and Henry Jenkins. I want to also thank my family, my brother, Marcus J. Smalls, the most brilliant thinker of hip hop I know, just also one of my best friends in the world. I want to thank my surrogate dad, Robert J. Penn Jr., for all of your love, care, laughter, and wisdom. Thank you to my friends. I want to also thank my grandmother who read my book twice. I'm not sure why. I sent her a hard copy and a soft copy, a cover, and she read both. She's adorable. To my niece, my nephew, my two nephews, my younger brother, my sister-in-law. Thank you to all my colleagues for all their support. I want to give a special shout out to the late Martin Wong. These are the subjects of my book. All those involved in Barry Gordy's Last Dragon, including Louis Van Este, the screenwriter who let me interview him, the artist Jean Grey, and all of the LGBTQ plus hip hoppers, past, present, and future. So I want to congratulate all the other awardees. I'm really looking forward to reading your books. And thank you all for coming here online, and in person. Thank you again for this.
Hi, my name is Debbie Applegate. It is a tremendous joy and privilege to be presenting one of the 2023 New York City Book Awards. I had the honor of standing here at the same spot last year to receive this prize. So I'm experiencing a delicious sense of deja vu as I look over this illustrious audience without having to do all of that work. Although 100 and some books was plenty. But this time it is doubly delightful because this year's winner, the eminent historian John Wood Sweet, has been a friend and colleague of mine for many years. Indeed, I want to say, for that reason, I did my best to honorably recuse myself from the discussion as the jury deliberated, but I needn't have worried. The decision to award this prize to this extraordinary book was unanimous. The Sewing Girl's Tale, A Story of Crime and Consequences in Revolutionary America. It was unanimous, and I think it was probably one of the easiest decisions that we made, although all of the books that were chosen were all emphatically endorsed by everyone. The Sewing Girl's Tale begins in the summer of 1783, when New York was, in John Sweet's words, quote, really a small town, only 40,000 people living within less than a mile of each other on the southern tip of Manhattan. That summer, a 17-year-old seamstress named Lana Sawyer was lured into a brothel and brutally raped by a gentleman named Harry Bedloe. This was not an uncommon story then or now, but what made Sawyer's story unusual was that for the first time in U.S. history, she brought criminal charges against her upper-class rapist. The resulting trial and Bedloe's scandalous acquittal, after only 15 minutes of deliberation, engulfed the city in controversy, sparking riots, a backlash in the press, and Sawyer's attempted suicide. But in a rare twist, Sawyer's stepfather then brought civil charges against Bedloe and surprisingly won. Now, it is a cliche to say that a story has been ripped from the headlines, but this story seems to have been literally ripped from today's front page of this morning's New York Times. And yet, I would say what really makes this story special, what makes the Sewing Girl's Tale so special, is that John takes an all too familiar tale of sexual double standards and upper class privilege and turns it into an incredibly suspenseful mystery story that immerses the city in that early, earthy world of New York City, while also at the same time shedding light, a very bright light, on the raging debates of our own moment in time. And again, I mean this quite literally, since, as many reviewers of the books noted, again, a lovely, maybe that's not the word, trenchant comparison is the fact that the 17th century lawyer, Sir Matthew Hale, whose appalling jurisprudence on the subject of rape dominated the trial of Harry Bedloe, was cited by Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito no fewer than 8 times in his recent decision overturning Roe v. Wade. I dare say that not even such an insightful scholar as John Sweet could have predicted that turn of events. So I will just say, to close, with a word or two about John Sweet himself. John is professor of history at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where he lives with his husband and 3 children, including a brand new, extremely adorable baby boy. His superior scholarship has been lavishly recognized by all the usual suspects. I will add that the good taste and exceedingly excellent judgment of the Society Library has been confirmed by the fact that the Sewing Girl's Tale has also been awarded a number of other prestigious prizes, including the Bancroft Prize, one of the highest honors in American history. It is a genuine pleasure to award this to you.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here and very grateful for the support of the library and the appreciation of the jurors. There are 2 people here in the room tonight I just wanted to shout out, in addition to Debbie, who rocks. And one is Barbara Jones, who was the editor at Henry Holt & Company, who acquired the manuscript, and I was so grateful for her interest in the project and her confidence that I could pull it off. And so I'm very pleased to see her here today. And another big supporter over the years who's been very meaningful to me is my cousin Steve Guitar, who's a member of the library. He may be the only member of my family that read my first book. And he was a big booster this time around, and I'm so glad he's in my life. It's also really special to be at the New York Society Library, which, as I take from your logo, was founded in 1754. It certainly was one of the few institutions that was in the city, active in the 1790s at the time this story takes place, that is still around. And one of the cool opportunities I had was to read your circulation records from the early 1790s to see who was checking out what. And it was interesting. It turns out all the defense attorneys trying to get Henry Bedloe off were members and read very boring books. And I particularly wanted to find out who was reading Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Women, but it turned out the committee in charge of buying books at that point did not purchase that time. And also didn't purchase a lot of of the seduction stories and novels of the day, like Clarissa, that were very popular, but were not quite considered respectable, wholesome reading. So it's really refreshing to see the wide range of books being celebrated here tonight. One of the great, I think, rewards of being at an event like this is to get little glimpses into some of the wonderful work that's being done to illuminate different corners of the city and different parts of its history. And that certainly was one of the great rewards for me of researching and writing The Sewing Girl's Tale. I constantly found myself getting to know New York in new ways. It seemed like every time I walked down the street, every time I turned a page, there was some new mystery, some new revelation. Ultimately, for me, this book became an opportunity to tell the story of our nation's founding, not through the eyes of the so-called founding fathers, but through the eyes of a young woman of modest circumstances, a 17-year-old sewing girl who refused to be silenced, or at least refused not to be heard, and who insisted that she too mattered. First was, I think, a powerful story of courage and of the costs of courage. I think we usually see the era of the American Revolution through the eyes of men like Alexander Hamilton, who appears in the book as a working attorney. And this story allowed me to think of what that looks like when you turn it kind of upside down and put characters you've never heard of, ordinary people, working people, at the center of the story. And what we see are things like working men, working women, whose lives are notoriously difficult to research in this period because they didn't leave a whole lot of imprint in the historical record. But as I researched Lana's story, I was surprised by what I was able to discover about the lives of the people in her social world, about their hopes, their dreams, their struggles, their resentments. And ultimately, this became a kind of history of the Revolutionary era, not from the top down, but from the bottom up. A story of elites trying to demand deference from their supposed inferiors, a story of working men fed up with being disparaged and dismissed, a story of young women looking to make their way in the city, a city full of possibility and of danger. And it's a story of early feminists making bold new arguments about human rights at a time when about the only way a woman without independent capital could earn a living wage was by working as a prostitute. It's a messy, prickly history of the Revolutionary period, but also one that I think that is more vibrant and dramatic and more representative of the period. To me, it reminds us that the story of New York, the story of America, is the story of all of us. We've heard a little bit tonight about the purpose of books, purposes of reading. I think we read books for various reasons, to get lost in a narrative, to learn about important issues and events, to experience a shift in perspective, to cultivate empathy. We have an expert on reading in the audience, so we'll see what he has to say. To understand the experience of others, to make sense of our world. And for me, Lana's story has had this uncanny doubleness that Debbie mentioned. I've worked on this project for more than 10 years, trying to learn about Lana's life, about her experiences, about her reactions. And at every turn, as I envisioned her world of 2 centuries ago, more than 2 centuries ago, I see at the same time the world we live in today. I think Lana Sawyer's case was the first major civil suit that produced money damages out of a rape claim. In Lana Sawyer, I see something of all of the friends, all of the relatives, all of the acquaintances, all of the coworkers, all of the students who have shared something of their own stories with me. And I think of moments in my own life. I think we live with so much exploitation and harassment, with so much shame and so much silence. And I think in the end, maybe this book can be a kind of invitation to all of us to honor our own experiences, to take our own lives seriously, to trust in ourselves, and to remember that all of us matter.
Good evening, everyone. It's my distinct privilege and pleasure to present this New York City Book Award to Xochitl Gonzalez for Olga Dies Dreaming. Xochitl is a staff writer for The Atlantic, where her work was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. She's an MFA graduate from the Iowa Writers Workshop, and her nonfiction work has been published in Elle Decor, Allure, Vogue, Real Simple, and The Cut. Olga Dies Dreaming, her debut novel, is a New York Times bestseller. It was named a Best of 2022 by Time, Kirkus, Washington Post, the New York Times, and NPR, and was the winner of the Brooklyn Public Library Book Prize in Fiction. Fiction fosters empathy. Good fiction allows us to walk in the shoes of others. Great fiction, like Olga Dies Dreaming, goes a step beyond and lets us dance in the shoes of others. To feel the unique rhythms and cross-currents of the characters' lives, the inner and outer worlds they inhabit, what makes their hearts beat, their minds tick. Olga, the title character, is a force of nature. Here's an extract from the opening pages of the book when we first meet her. The setting is New York City, 2017. She's a wedding planner for the uber wealthy of Manhattan, and she's giving directions to one of her staff on napkins. Now, Carlos, it's critical that the napkins be placed at exactly 30-degree angles from what would be 12 o'clock on the plate. And even more critical, that the place card be set parallel, not perpendicular, to that angle. The mother of the bride said she might do some spot checks with her protractor. And after a year of working with the woman, I'd say that odds are high that she actually does it. And then a little later, Olga did some mental math. It would take 6 pairs of hands another 4 hours to create an optic that the guests would undo in seconds with the flick of the wrist. 290 guests, to be exact. Barring a crazy incident, some overgrown frat boy spraying the bridesmaids with champagne, say, or a drunken guest knocking over the Croquembouche display, they should end the night with between 150 and 175 brand new, beautiful linen hem-stitched napkins that she could take for her cousin Mabel to use at her wedding that fall. Olga hated her cousin Mabel. Olga and her brother Pedro, a popular congressman representing their Brooklyn neighborhood, are both bold-faced names in New York. But behind closed doors, things aren't quite as glamorous. They have their secrets. Olga Dies Dreaming takes place in the months surrounding the most devastating hurricane in Puerto Rico's history. Olga and Pedro's mother, Blanca, who abandoned them to advance a militant political cause, hurtles back into their lives with the winds of the hurricane. Olga Dies Dreaming shines a fresh light on our city, both with the stories it tells and the possibilities it illuminates of the other stories out there, still untold. It's a work of such energy, wit, and poise, crackling prose and searing social commentary, that it will undoubtedly inspire other books, shine a path for more stories to come to light, and leave our city and the literary world far richer in its wake. Olga Dies Dreaming is an utterly brilliant, thoroughly entertaining novel. On behalf of the jury and the New York Society Library, I'm honored to present Xochitl Gonzalez with this award.
This is a look of extreme gratitude that about 15 minutes or so ago realized in my fluster of traffic left my remarks in the Uber. I said this, and I was like, anyway, I'll be less eloquent than my other colleagues, but I want to thank the New York Library Society and all the jurors for reading so many books. This is a tremendous undertaking, and I just am so grateful. This award meant so much to me. My friend Robert Jones Jr., who's also from Brooklyn, sent me a text when he saw this, and he said, this one means a lot. And I will say that it's true, because I think that as an artist, you realize that your job is to tell the truth about things, and sometimes the truth can be uncomfortable, but it should also be somewhat entertaining. and to set out to talk about the problems of a city, and particularly as complicated of a position as the Puerto Rican experience in New York and the Nuyorican experience in New York, is not a simple thing, and it has to implicate a number of people, your fellow New Yorkers sometimes. And so to be embraced and reflected, and to sort of take this narrative of a community and a family and say, this is also New York. And I'm a South Brooklyn girl, and I didn't write this book until I was 41 years old. I didn't start writing until I was 40. And I just felt desperate to put us on the page before the way that I knew Brooklyn and I knew New York, and I remembered Nuyorican being a part of this city. I had to get it down as fast as I possibly could before we were sort of forgotten, and to see it embraced in this particular way and enshrined in sort of New York literature is really important to me. And I want to just thank my agent, Molly Glick, who's here, who I love, because 100 pages in, she read it and we met for coffee, and she said, I know that this family exists, and I don't think I've ever seen them in a book. And I just kept going and going, and I want to thank who wasn't able to be here, but Megan Lynch, my editor at Flatiron Books, who was not afraid of a big crazy novel, because you can't write a novel that has to do with Puerto Ricans at all and not have it be very verbose and very complicated. We just do this very, very well, complicated and verbose. So, and she was not afraid of that in an era where I think, Big Wild books maybe hadn't quite been in vogue, and the reception to this one had been, is it it's a couple, published in January of 22, and I still don't really have a good log line. Is it a love story? Is it a political novel? It's all of these things, because that's what the city is. And so I just want to say thank you for embracing the complexity of this book, because it is also the complexity of our hometown. And I just want to say one final thing, which is we've been living in a phase of difficult conversations and difficult time for artists and for all of us, I think, where we're constantly being challenged about our assumptions. And I think sometimes tonight is so affirming to me, hearing about all these books and having gotten to read Sadiq's book, and I can't wait to read all of the others. I think the point of all this difficulty is to get where we are today. Art is always at the forefront, and I hope that it usually is the leading place for culture, but which is to say that we're not afraid to tell these stories. And I don't know that there was in a different era, I would have been able. The book only works because the narrator, who is in some way me, is unafraid to say what's really true. And at a certain point, it's like, we've got nothing to lose. And I think what I'm seeing is, it's not, as I think Disha said, it's not that these are forgotten people. These are untold stories. And it's beautiful to see these stories of marginalized New York being told and embraced and offered such recognition in this beautiful space. So thank you so much.
Well, this concludes the ceremony, but I want everyone to give a big round of applause again to all of our winners. Your books are brilliant, and we have books for sale. My colleague Maria Luisa, who's standing right here, will be selling them on behalf of our favorite independent bookseller, the Corner Bookstore. And I'm sure the winners would be very happy to sign them if you would like. Anyway, thank you again for coming. Come again to the New York Society Library. We have lots of programs and events, and obviously lots of good book streets. So please come and visit us again. Thank you very much.